Hey everyone, I'm going to take a little break from the sanding and priming side of things and do a fun little electronics project. Ian Martin out of the BB-8 Builders Club told me about this switch that you can get on Amazon, which you can install into the 12 volt side of the Droid. And you can get the whole Droid powered with this remote control rather than having to manually flick the toggle switches that are currently in there. So, considering that that also requires taking off all of the panels, or at least this panel here, to get into there, having the remote control will be super helpful. And yeah, so let's get started with that. The first thing I'm going to do is take off this casing and check out the chip inside. Okay, so the top of the case is off. There's five wires, two ground, a power in, power out, and then there's this blue wire here, which you can't really see, but it's coming off of the top here. And that's the antenna that receives the signal from the remote control. So what we really have to worry about here is the four power wires. First thing I'm going to do is cut off this plastic casing because I'm not going to use it. And I'm also going to take off the frame of the Droid so I can get to all of those components. Okay, so I have the frame off of the 12 volt side, so let's take a look at how that's currently wired. Right now I have the two batteries here, both at 12 volts, and they are wired in parallel, they're wired in parallel to keep them at 12 volts but with double the capacity. So I have both of the negative charge wires going into one single ground wire and both positive wires going into one single positive wire, and then they connect here. The positive wire goes to the fuse, and then after the fuse it goes to two switches. The first switch is here, and this powers up the servos. So right now the batteries are actually on, so we can power on the servos, and this is for both of these guys. And then this switch over here, I'm just going to turn that off first and hit up the Arduino first, powers the Arduino and the whole 12 volt rail, which is then stepped down to the 5 volts there. So one switch does 12 volts to the rail and 5 volt step down to the Arduino, and the other switch does the servos. And that tends to happen sometimes. So now we got to replace those. I still want to keep the fuse in there, and obviously I need to keep the batteries in there. So we got to figure out a way to get the switch in line and keep everything working. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. Okay, just to recap that on paper a little bit, we have the two batteries here. The positive from this battery goes up, connects to the positive from this battery. So here's the positive side. The positive side goes to the fuse, and then from the fuse it goes to switch 1 and then to switch 2. When switch 1 is turned on, power goes to the two servos. When switch 2 is on, power goes to the board. That's the positive side, and then the negative side, which is the connection of this negative wire and this negative wire that meet here. One of the negative wires goes to the board and one goes to the servos. Alright, so how are we going to do that on here? So if we still have our batteries but down here, then the positive is still going to go to the fuse, and then it's going to go to the switch, and the negative is going to go right from the batteries to the switch. And then after that, the positive is going to split twice. It's going to have one that goes to the board and one that goes to the servos, and then the servos are going to split, and the same thing for the ground wire. It's going to split to the board and to the servos, and then the servos is going to split again. So if we can get that set up, we should be all set. Okay, so I kind of started disassembling some of this wires here. I still have a little ways to go, but I have the power wire that goes to the board separated. I think I can reuse this ground wire. I'm going to reuse this fuse wire after I desolder it from the switch here. So right now what I'm going to do is desolder these two, get rid of these two switches, keep the wires that I can keep, and then we can start soldering some new connections. Okay, so I got all that desoldered, which cleans everything up a little bit. Now I just have these two power wires, which eventually need to be joined, and then a third wire coming out of them. And here's the ground wire, which I'm probably going to keep because it's already there. It might add an extra banana clip in here, but if I don't have to desolder all that stuff, I think it'll save me some time. Coming over to the board here, this thing's pretty chintzy in terms of wiring. So I'm going to desolder all of these wires Let's see if I can get that to focus. I'm going to desolder these wires and add my own. Ian Martin had a good suggestion to alternate front and back so that they don't arc. So for this input, the white wire, I'm going to put that on top. The red wire I'm going to solder below the board. And then for the ground, I'll solder that back on top. So there's no two wires that are super close together that could arc or anything like that. Okay, so the board is desoldered and I have my first connection kind of ready to go here. So these banana clips, or I'm sorry, these bullet connectors are going to go straight to the batteries. And then the positive wire is going to connect to the fuse, which is going to connect to the board, and the negative wire is just going to go straight to the board. And that'll give me a connection from the batteries to the switch, and then I can focus on switch to Droid. Okay, sorry, I cheated a little bit. I went ahead and just kept going and forgot to record. So I do have all the connections hooked up. Let me see if I can focus that. Yeah. And I have ground going to ground, power to go to power, goes to the board, goes to the servos, and then I have the batteries hooked up. And it works. Yay! So if I press on here, it comes on, and I press off, and it all turns off. On, off. Okay, I didn't do a very good job documenting this whole process, but I have everything installed now. So I made a little mount, which is zip tied into place here. It's pretty sturdy. It's not going to fall off. And then I was also able to mount up the servo controller here, which has been kind of floating in a problem. And I also got the switch installed right there. Batteries are in and it is wired up, so I can turn it on by pushing the on button. And yeah, the servo kind of decides to start spinning itself because there's nothing telling it what to do. But that'll change once I get the remote control synced up with it. Turn it off. Alright, I think that's going to do it for this project. Back onto the outside of the ball.